So I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about knowing what you're going to get into if you're considering podcasting and where people get stuck. And then I'll infuse some of my little, you know, tips in there or things that I screwed up along the way. Because despite the coaching, I mean, everything is trial and error. Some of you are coaches and consultants, and it's really, you can give your client the plan, but it's, they have to execute and they have to iron out the kinks. And so that's how you have to look at your podcasting journey as, you gotta get started, you gotta take action, and you gotta iron out the kinks. So let's talk about what you're getting into. So one of the things I learned, in the whole process is a lot of people get started, like I mentioned, but they don't make it through. Um, there's people that have abandoned their podcasts. They maybe did one season and then you never saw them again. I did an interview for a young lady in this, probably one of the same Facebook groups that Tanya and I met. And she never got launched. Like, where's my interview? So, people love to dive in. It's just like starting a business. Starting a business is the easy part. Anybody can get started. It's sustaining it. It is building a sustainable business. That's, the key. So the thing with podcasting is you have to know your purpose. So what's the reason you're starting this podcast? Is it to, for brand exposure? Is it, because you want another income stream? Is it because, you want people to have a more or a deeper knowledge of who you are as a business owner? And sometimes people get started for the wrong reasons. They want to go, instead of connecting it to their business, they're starting something totally different and opposite of what they're doing in business. So you really have to sit down and think about what is your reason for starting. Then you also want to consider that you need to have an identity for your podcast. So as professional service providers, you have to remember that, you're providing an identity for your business, right? You have a logo, you have a name for your business, and you have all of these things for your business. You have to do the same thing also for your podcast. You have to make sure that you have a voice, you have a mission for your podcast, that when people land on your podcast, you have it laid out in terms of what your mission is and what they will get from tuning in. And then you want to think about how you're going to start. So, of course, there's a whole long checklist of things how to get started. But, this isn't really a how-to, because I want to just share, my journey, and then I want you to ask questions. But, you really want to take into account, what kind of equipment will I need, for my podcast? What are the essentials, and what do I build out to later? Because you'll hear some gurus tell you, oh, you need a Rode, what is it? The mixer and all these things. And you don't need all that. You don't. And I think those things are just barriers to getting started. If you think you got to spend $2,000 just on equipment. And I think and I'll get to like my recommendations for equipment later, but you don't need all of that. So just think about, what do you need to get started? You definitely need equipment. You need topics. You need to have a sense of who your target audience is, just like for your business, you have a target audience. Who is your target audience for your podcast? You need an avatar. So you need to clearly have a clearly defined individual in terms of who you're speaking to with your podcast. And you want to research the market. If whatever your topic is for your podcast, or whatever it is you've decided to cover in your podcast, who else is in the space? What are they doing? And actually listen to podcasts. You have some people that start a podcast that have never listened to an actual podcast, and you want to listen to different people. And make sure the boss experience is on your list. But but you want to listen to different people when it comes to you know, the different formats, you know, how are they starting? How are they ending? What are the what uniqueness is it in within that podcast? You have some people that incorporate things like affirmations, you know, to close out their podcast, or, you know, they'll have a quote. So, you know, you have to think about you know, how you want your podcast to be structured. And you got to have a good show. You got to have a good show. So, you know, starting out, you know, one of the things I will say, I had a clear plan, I had my checklist going and everything. But the one thing that was interesting when I started out is, you know, I had a lofty goal of starting with 22 episodes for my first season. And after I like put the 22nd episode in the atmosphere, I almost passed out. So never will I do that again. So, you know, it's not about the numbers, you know, and I say that to say it's not about the numbers. It's about, you know, focusing on your content, you know, thinking about you know, how you're going to start out. Are you going to have seasons? I recommend seasons. Are you going to have, you know, themes per season? You know, so those are some of the things that I did. I make sure for each season I have a theme, I have a goal. You know, with each episode, there's a specific goal that I want the listener to reach. And so I think through all of that. And when you think about where people get stuck, is a couple of things. People, what I've seen and what I've almost did, and I quickly brought myself back, is I felt like in the beginning, like I had to, like the podcast was something, it was part of my business, but it had to be separate somehow. And I don't recommend that. I recommend that it's integrated into your website, integrated into everything when you're communicating with people in your, you know, and that maybe as a PS or postscript in your email, when you send it out to your list about, even if it's unrelated to your podcast, hey, have you checked out my podcast? Maybe as a welcome email for people that subscribe to your email list, and, you know, letting them know, hey, I got this great podcast, check it out, and where they could find it. And so making, you know, just make sure you integrate it into your business, because a lot of people have podcasts and there it's like a secret. So you want to make sure people know that you have a podcast, and this is how you find me. And, you know, this is how it exists. You know, you can go here on YouTube, you can go on, you know, what is it, iHeart Music, or you can go on Amazon, you know, tell people how to find your podcast. And monetization. And, you know, with monetization, you can do it a few ways. You know, you can have like people subscribe, you know, through Patreon, and in other ways. You can use YouTube. You know, as you know, YouTube is a monetization tool. You can get clients through YouTube. One of the things that I started doing, and my YouTube channel just took off, was, you know, with my clips. You know, I love repurposing content. I'm already telling Tanya I'm going to repurpose this. You know, and what I do is I have it broken down into clips of 60 seconds or less. And so when you're thinking about social media, when you're thinking about YouTube, and when I did this with YouTube, you know, my numbers went through the roof. 60 seconds or less shorts. YouTube is favoring shorts right now. And you make sure that you have your YouTube channel positioned to be, you know, for people to come on, to buy from you, to know what you have available. And, you know, you can use it to increase your numbers on YouTube. My recommendation with that is to learn SEO, you know, just for your podcast as well as YouTube. But YouTube is another monetization tool. You can get sponsors, you know, for your podcast. You can also use your own ads. For my podcast, I have both. I do three things. I do affiliate marketing. And so what that is, you know, I'll partner with someone else, and I will create an ad in my voice or in their voice, and I'll feature it on my podcast. And you always want to feature ads that people pay you for in the beginning or the middle. you know, you don't give them the end, and unless you're telling them you're giving them the end, and then you have a lower cost. But always have, this is how much it costs to be in the beginning, and I would define the beginning. The first 7 minutes or whatever the case may be. This is how much it costs to have a middle, mid episode slot, and this is how much it costs if you want the end. No one wants the end, but it's always great to give it as an option. Um, what else? And when I say create your own ads, you all have services and you all have products that you sell. So in your own voice, create a 30-second ad of, about your product, and that's what you feature on your podcast. You don't have to sell anyone else's products. You don't have to get sponsors if you don't want to. That these are just the things that I do. And then you can try different things and see what works for you. If you don't have a product yet and you're just starting off with a podcast, then I would do affiliate marketing. And you can do affiliate marketing, through products you may find on like Digistores. Was it Digistore 24 is one option. And then you can network with people and, come up with some agreement or arrangement to feature them on your podcast, quid pro quo, where they give you something, you give them something, you give them a slot on your podcast and you see how they can promote you. And let me see, I have my notes. I'm just making sure I didn't forget anything. The other thing is too, if you have events, does anyone here do live events? Yeah. So that's another way, you promote your live events. Make sure, get people out and, make sure you're constantly doing that on your podcast. And the one thing you want to be, and probably the big mistake I see, particularly with people that just start off in podcasting, is consistency. So if you're going to do a daily podcast, do a daily podcast. I don't suggest that, but starting out, but if you do whatever it is you say you're going to do, I do once a week, and I work in seasons. So, I'll have a set goal for a particular season or theme. And in between seasons, one thing I also do is I have bonus episodes. How many of you make content throughout the year? No one here makes content on social media, LinkedIn and YouTube? No? Just a couple of people? So I splice that up too, and I repurpose it on the podcast so that because on your distribution platforms, you can upload ahead of time. So the one thing that I found is during my first season, I had the season one, and then I took a break, and I took like an 8-week break. And I recommend you take breaks, but you can take those breaks and still have content running. What I saw when I took that break is I had to re-engage people when it was time for me to start up again with season two, because they had 8 weeks where they didn't hear me. And so the reason I said, who's recording on social media, YouTube, LinkedIn, where, other content, that can be used, where you can use the audio, upload that in between. It doesn't have to be a 30-minute episode. It doesn't even have to be, even if you got like 5 or 10 minutes, keep people engaged even when you're taking a break. So that was a mistake I made in season one. I haven't made that mistake since. Because re-engaging people and getting them back to you, it's time consuming, and it takes a lot of energy, and it's just better to keep them engaged. Let's see. Marketing and sales. So one of the things that I found when I was in season one, I told you I did 22 episodes, way too many for a new podcaster. So season one, I also used a lot of guests during that season. And so one of the things you want to think when you're planning out your podcast is, do I want to have guests? It can be just you. You possess the expertise to carry your own podcast. I think guests highlight your knowledge. You can have guests that can come in and highlight the things that you don't cover, highlight the things you don't know. But the thing with guests, you want to make sure that you have something built in where because they'll come on your show. You won't have any problem finding guests. The question is finding good guests that will share the episode. People know that you're going to share the episode and they'll come on your show and they'll get their little 30 minutes, 60, however many minutes the episode ends up being. They'll get their promotion time and you'll never hear from them again. And that's it. Not only is that not a good partnership for you, but it's a little disheartening when people don't share the episode. So one of the things that I started doing is, before as we're talking about, if I'm going to have a guest, we need to talk about how are you going to share, but also what platforms are you on? Can we do a live together? We need to do a podcast swap, or we need to do something where I'm guaranteed equal exposure. So that's something I did after there was a few guests from season 1 that did not share the episode. And then there was one that just like half shared it. She shared it on a Saturday. I'm like, you didn't even like try and even, you shared it once. You didn't like, what about Monday through Friday? Like, can we share Monday through Friday or Monday through Thursday? She shared it on a Saturday. So, that was a lesson learned, from season 1. So now, you have to come with, a way that I'm going to benefit from you being on the show as well. And when it comes to monetization, some people charge people for being on their podcast. You have, if you could get really good guests, you could charge a pretty good fee. There's some podcasts you may pay $3-5 grand to be on just to get that exposure because they have the numbers. So if you can get the numbers, this could really be a good income stream for you. And the thing is to get good guests. Make sure you look at who's coming on your show. You don't want to come on a show or have a live show and you got a loose cannon who says something that's gonna tarnish your brand. So make sure you know who you're having on your show. And yeah, I think that's all my notes. Let me talk about stats. So, when you're growing a show, you want to know what your numbers are. You want to define, what it means for you to do good in your show and with your efforts. And a lot of that depends on what's your mission. Some people do podcasting as a hobby. They enjoy it. And that's totally fine. If that's, something you want to do, there's nothing wrong with that. And, but if you're going to use it as a tool for your business, as a marketing tool, you want to have some clearly defined numbers. So some of the numbers you want to look at are like your downloads, but downloads can be misleading because you can have 100 downloads. But what does that mean? And when people click download and they subscribe to your show, they're automatically downloaded. It doesn't mean they listen to every episode. So, you have to take it with a grain of salt. But I do look at downloads because if I get, are my numbers up? Are they down? But you also have to consider if you didn't sell anything, if nothing else happened. Downloads are good, but they're not the sole factor you want to look at. I look at engagement, especially with YouTube. Did someone leave a comment? Did someone reach out to me through my email? Because every time I talk to someone, I say, well, oh, how did you find me? Did I get a download of, one of my freebies from someone that saw me on YouTube? So those are all measures. Did I increase in subscribers? Did I get a new review? And where are people coming from? I like to see, where people are coming from, because once you have a podcast, you have people that are just tune on to see what you're talking about. And then you have people that are really tuned in because they want to know more about you and your business. So, you want to see, do I have looky-loos, or do I have people who are genuinely interested in my business? Am I growing? Am I reaching new regions? And what are the demographics of the people? Am I reaching the people that I want to reach with my content? So that is all. Oh, let me talk about equipment. So when you're thinking about your equipment, I started out with a microphone, a good microphone. And even with your computer, depending on what kind of computer you have, your microphone may not be that great. So you want to have a good microphone, a pop filter, headphones. I like headphones because I don't know. I don't know about your house, but my house isn't always quiet. I have a dog. I have a 17-year-old who loves to play music from Alexa. So my house isn't typically quiet. So, and I live in New York, by the way. So, everybody in New York has neighbors. And sometimes it sounds like my neighbors are river dancing as soon as I start recording. So I have a noise, uh, I forget what it's called, but a noise reducing microphone to help kind of eliminate all the stuff and the occasional let us not mention the occasional fire truck that goes by, or the police driving by with the sirens on, all the things that happen in New York City, right? So, and good lighting. People need to see you. They need to see you and they need to hear you. And so you want to increase the likelihood of that happening. And then if you really want to, you can get a mixer. It creates better sound. But if that's something you can build up to later. Some people have cameras where they can catch different angles of themselves. Some people have like a studio in their home, or they physically go to a podcasting studio, and the cameras help capture the different angles. If you're going to use a mic stand where you sit on a couch and deliver your podcast that way, then you're going to need a stand for the mic, and you'll need a stand for the cameras as well. So, so the thing I want to encourage people here to do is don't overthink it. If you're going to do it, make sure you do it. Because once you do it, you want to be consistent. You don't want to start and stop. You don't want to put garbage out there, because everything you put out is a reflection of you and your brand. So you want to make sure that you're putting out good content. You want to make sure you're creating a good show, whatever that is for you. And part of you deciding what's a good show is really thinking about, when you're starting out, what are 10 to 15 topics that the people that I want to communicate to, what are 10 to 15 topics that I can share in 15 minutes or less, or 30 minutes or less. I'm actually liking the shorter. I'm noticing with my own podcast, the shorter the episode, the more listens, the more downloads I'm getting. And I use Chartable, by the way, for my stats. They break it down for you, so you can see where your new subscribers, because when you're on different, channels, it's hard to pull. You can't go to each channel and see what your stats are. That would be very time consuming. So Chartable pulls it all together. That's what I use. But whatever you choose to do, just do it, and be consistent, and think about it, plan it out. How many episodes will I have in this season? What resources do I have to, have those audio clips that I can release, even when I'm on hiatus and resting, so don't overcomplicate it. The key is in the planning and making sure you do your research, so you know what's out there. The thing I wanted to do with the Boss Experience podcast is, when I looked at like all the different business podcasts, everyone's talking about, different ways to make money. Everyone was talking about, how to get that next sale. Everyone's talking about marketing and this and that. And I talk about those things too. But the one thing that no one was talking about in relation to entrepreneurs is talking about the full boss experience. And when I say the full boss experience, coming into entrepreneurship, we come in with baggage, right? We're coming in with baggage from our job, the toxic workplace we may be working at that we're trying to leave, and hoping that our business replaces that 9 to 5. So we're coming in with a lot of stuff. And so I get into all of that because just because if you experience something before entrepreneurship, of course you're going to experience, once you're an entrepreneur too. And it's, for let's say for example, anxiety. If I struggled with anxiety before I started my business, imagine my anxiety when I don't get the sales that I want to get, when I'm not getting the clients I want to get. So, the boss experience is not just about the marketing and sales, it's about the entire experience, and how to manage